Hello, BookTube. It's time for another essay, and it's going to be the first section out of A. Edward Newton's This Book Collecting Game. I have taken the dust jacket off because, as you can see, it's quite fragile at the top, and pieces keep falling off. So I want to preserve it as much as possible until I can get some dust jacket protectors. It was originally published in 1926. And my edition is from 1930, published by George Routledge and Sons, and it has a nice frontispiece. And this drawing will appear in what I'm going to read. The caption here is A. Edward Newton, the Hobby Writer, after an original watercolor by Gordon Ross. And it's sort of, he's breaking through a fence that says the amenities, and a little fox that says nothing daunts him. And Newton has written several books. The first book I had of his was called The Greatest Book Ever, The Greatest Book of the World, I think it is. I used it in my I've not used it, but I showed it in my shelf tour of books about books. I just can't lay my hands on it at the moment. And I have another one here, The Amenities of Book Collecting by him. And they look like fabulous essays, but they're fairly long, most of them. This one's short, hence I'm able to do it in a video. He was an inveterate collector. When he died, he had about 10,000 books in his collection. And there's a really nice, and I've mentioned this already in another video, 3 or 4 volume of his library that went up for sale, and that would be kind of cool to have. And also, like, the name of his house was called Oak Knoll, and there's a press called Oak Knoll Books, a publisher. And here's one of the books. It's about a forger, Thomas James Wise. He comes up in here in the article, but obviously 1930 it was not quite known. I think John Carter and his partner were working on figuring out what the forgeries were, or that they were forgeries, but it wasn't known until later. And these, as I say, these are articles, and he says right here, my thanks due to the editors of Atlantic Monthly and Ladies' Home Journal and the Sunday Evening Post for permission to reprint. Now, here's the black and white of that one there, and now it's called a preliminary Canter. Book collecting. It's a great game. Anybody with ordinary intelligence can play it. There are, indeed, people who think that it takes no brains at all. Their opinion may be ignored. No great amount of money is required unless one becomes very ambitious. It can be played at home or abroad, alone or in company. It can even be played by correspondence. Everyone playing it can make his own rules and change them during the progress of the game. It is not considered cricket to do this in other games. I have many times been asked what my rules are. The question is easily answered. I have limited myself to few fine examples of illumination and printing and binding, and generally to the masterpieces of English literature in first editions. This last is a large order. I hitched my wagon to a star 50 years ago, but I did not get up to speed for 20 years. Many collectors have flown higher than I, but none have made a more modest beginning. I own today and value highly books which cost me 15 cents, and I well remember when the expenditure of $1 for a book seemed like extravagance. When I owned a few hundred books, I referred to it largely as my library. Now that I have 8,000 or 10,000 volumes, I know that it is not a library. It is merely a collection of books. I cannot understand how people can get along without books, and, useful as they are, I do not call a Sears Roebuck catalog and the telephone directory books. I am firmly convinced that most people do not know how to live. How should they? Seeing that they march to the tune of, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm on my way. The game of life is a good deal harder to play well than is the book collecting game. A good rule is to read as much as you can, but if one must talk about something. Give the idiot who insists upon telling you how many miles he gets out of a gallon of gas, or the golfer who is forever going over a given course in 70 a wide berth. Someone has said that most friendships are mere confederacies in vice or leagues in folly. It is not so with us. We who play the noble game of authors know that the byproduct of book collecting is friends. Thomas J. Wise, the great English collector, has on his book plate a motto which is characteristic of the man. It's a little couplet. Books being my friends, where on earth I be, solace or solitude, bonds of society. How many and how various places are the friends I have made through books? If variety is the spice of life, and it is, the incidents in my life of the book collector are many and various. You are fond of books, I see, says the visitor with a leer, as who should say, I know your guilty secret. I was brought up with books, and I am just crazy about them. I wish you could see my copy of A Christmas Carol. I think it is a first edition. The illustrations are by Cruikshank. The illiterate always think that Cruikshank was Dickens' premier illustrator. And it is bound in red morocco with the portrait of Dickens hand-painted in ivory let into the cover. Shoot that man into space, painless if you can, but shoot him. Cut your losses and let your profits ride, is good advice, even if it does come from a stockbroker. There are few finer or more innocent pleasures than talking books to one who knows. There may be joy in heaven, I am told there is, but the evidence is not conclusive, and I'll take mine here in my library. And one's mail is so interesting. I require the services of an able-bodied and nimble-minded young woman to enable me to cope with mine. Let me give an illustration. Some time ago I received a letter at the top of which was an original drawing, which reproduced appears at the top of this article, the one I showed at the beginning, the black and white one. It was such an exquisite little sketch. I've lost my place here. Some time ago I received a letter at the top of which was an original drawing which appears at the top of this article. It was such an exquisite little sketch, so full of humorous detail that it was several minutes before I gave my attention to the writing underneath it. When I had decoded it, it was written in the most perplexing hand. This is what I read. My dear Mr. Newton, some months ago, Mr. E.R. Gee wrote to me that you wished my permission to use my portrait of Surtees in your forthcoming volume, The Greatest Book in the World. Mr. Gee, I believe, notified you of my cordial consent and added that I would be glad to prepare you a special plate suitable for monochrome reproduction. So, may I ask in the kindest manner possible, do you consider it entirely amenteous to borrow one's neighbor's things and see them without saying, and use them without saying thank you? Yours for bigger and better amenities, Gordon Ross. I was amused and somewhat nettled with delight. What had happened was this. In the preparation of my paper on sporting books, I had several times consulted E.R. Gee of New York, the well-known specialist on the fascinating subject. In the course of conversation with him one day, he informed me that he was about to publish a beautiful portrait of Robert Smith Surtees, the creator of the immortal Jack Jorrocks and Peg and Soapy Sponge, and a host of others. The portrait was indeed a beauty, and wishing to be the service to my friend Gee, I told him that I would, if he wished, reproduce it in my paper on sporting books, my idea being to do Mr. Gee and the artist a good turn. I had at that time only just heard of the artist Gordon Ross, and in the pressure of publication and at the same time getting ready to go abroad, I quite overlooked my indebtedness to him as the artist of the portrait I had reproduced. Immediately I had turned over the manuscript and the illustrations of my book to my publisher. And then he quotes 3 lines of poetry. I sailed away on the foaming main in the biggest possible hurry. For dinner, we'd lots of dry champagne and lots of other things, and I never gave Mr. Ross or Mr. Gee or their print another thought. But Mr. Ross is English, that is Scotch, in a word, British, and a Briton will have his rights. The fact that Mr. Ross has lived and made a distinguished position for himself in New York is, in his judgment, no reason why I should, in his words, borrow his portrait without saying thank you, hence his letter. It has for many years been my habit, when in the tight place, to fess up. I wrote Ross and told him the truth, that in the hurry of preparation for my departure, it had quite escaped my mind that I should have secured his permission to reproduce his portrait of Surtees. I referred to the pleasure possession gave me. Thank God I bought and paid for one. And finally I told him that I was delighted that I had been so remiss, as it brought me an exquisite little drawing at the top of the reprimand letter. Finally, I commissioned him to make another and a larger drawing in color of the same sketch, that I might frame it and hang it among my sporting pictures and use the tiny reproduction of it as a book plate for my sporting books. That was the colored one I showed at the frontispiece. In due course, I received another letter from Mr. Ross, who accompanied by another drawing here reproduced. The letter read, "If I may borrow the literary style of the auctioneers, these highly esteemed prints are offered in pairs, and much more in token of complete forgiveness." And I'll just pause for a second. And there's the second one that he got. It's Newton repairing the fence. He's repairing the fence. The fence of friendship. Which of the little Ross sketches is the most amusing, the most exquisite? Let the reader decide. They are equally lovely to me, and no friendship is more enduring than one which begins with a little misunderstanding. Love there may be at first sight, but friendship grows more slowly. To return to books, I have no repugnances. Shaftesbury is not too genteel for me, nor Jonathan Wild too low. I collect Bibles and sporting books. I bless my stars for a taste so catholic, so unexcluding. Just at the moment, the novel interests me enormously. People have been collecting poetry and the drama for years, but the novel, the last and most popular of the literary forms, has been neglected. Its turn will come. It is here now. A few days ago I bought from Edgar Wells in New York a copy of Incognita, or Love and Duty Reconciled, a novel. This is perhaps the earliest instance of the word novel used in our sense on a title page of an English book. William Congreve wrote it when he was 21. It is very tiny and excessively rare. Dr. Johnson says he would rather praise than read it. Bless the doctor's honest heart. There were no frills about him. What he thought, he said. Speaking of novels, I have just read Huckleberry Finn for the first time. It is a great book. Galsworthy ranks it with Don Quixote, and rightly. If I don't live to see the first issue of the first edition of that book sell for $1,000, I shall die prematurely. Now, reader, don't for heaven's sake leap up from your chair, seizing pen, ink, and paper, offering me your copy of Huck Finn for half the money. I said the first issue of the first edition, the one bound in blue cloth. Yours, probably, is bound in green, the one in which page 238 is on a stub. And if you want to know why, ask your bookseller. He will tell you. I am not teaching book collecting by correspondence. The sieve of my memory is coarsely meshed. Only a few important dates and facts are retained in it, and by the time your letter reaches me, I may have forgotten. Just ask John T. Winterich. He will know. If I am not mistaken, he has written an article about it. I repeat, Huckleberry Finn is a great book. I take no merit for this discovery. I love that. I like that. It's a bit opinionated, but it's humorous. Yeah. So here's the first. Like that was again. That was the first sketch that was sent to him. But this is the colored one that he did. It's sort of him, breaking down the fence willy-nilly on his hobby horse. And then when he sort of made up with the artist did another print, like another one of Newton mending the fence. I just love that. And then here's the title page of Incognita or Love and Duty Reconciled, a novel. So it says a very early, perhaps the earliest use of the word novel in an English sense. It's Congreve's first publication. This is one of 4 known copies at the time. I don't know if there's any more, but there's the title page. And then here's, well, obviously it's black and white, so you can't tell whether that's blue or green for Huckleberry Finn. And he mentioned, as I said, Thomas J. Wise, and this was like 1926, so the book came out in 1930, so even then they wouldn't have been able to put a note in or anything like that. And this is a biography of Thomas James Wise and Harry Buxton Foreman. It's the 2 forgers that were in on the forging of the papers, 19th century papers. John Carter wrote that book, An Inquiry into the 19th century papers, that he broke the story with that. And I don't know much about it other than I remember reading John Carter's book 25 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago. I need to reread it. Hence, I'm getting a bit more material, some biography and other background material. But anyway, I enjoyed that. I hope you did. As I say, the other essays in here sound marvelous, like the book collecting game, the books of my boyhood, the book itself, the binding, the auction room. But they're like goes from page 9 to 43, so it's like 30 pages. There's no way I can read that in 30 minutes, because it would take me more than that unless I break it in 2. That's always a possibility, but it makes it kind of long. But anyway, that's it for today, and I'll be back at least tomorrow with another essay. Take care, BookTube. Bye.